Today, we're cracking open a book that has been at the center of firestorms and legal battles for over 50 years. A book that asks us to rethink, well, pretty much everything we know about one of the world's most revered epics, the Ramayana. So let's start with a really provocative question. What if a story considered sacred by hundreds of millions of people isn't actually about gods and demons? What if it's a coded history of conquest and power? What if the hero isn't really the hero? And the villain? Well, isn't the villain at all? And here it is. This is the book that offers those very controversial answers. It's called Sachi Ramayan, which translates to the True Ramayana. And believe me, since it was first published, its pages have sparked just incredible outrage, major legal battles, and a really profound debate about a foundational story. You see, the book makes this incredibly bold claim. It presents itself as a key, the one tool you need to unlock the real meaning of the Ramayana. It's not just another version of the story. It claims to be the guide to what the story has secretly been about all along. Okay, so here's the crucial shift in perspective it asks us to make. Forget the gods, forget the demons, forget all the divine will for a second. The book argues we need to read the Ramayana as a historical account, a political narrative about a massive clash between two very different cultures. Now, this interpretation didn't just appear out of thin air. It all started back in 1944 with Periyar, a major social reformer in South India. But it was in 1968, when his work was translated into Hindi, that it really exploded onto the national stage, and almost immediately ended up in the courtroom. That history is a huge part of why this book is still so provocative today. All right, let's get to the core of the argument, starting with the epic's protagonist, Ram. In this rereading, his divinity is completely stripped away, and his actions are put under a very harsh, very political microscope. And this really shows you the night and day difference, doesn't it? On one side, you have the traditional view, Ram as the perfect king, literally God on earth, and on the other, the book's interpretation, Ram as a shrewd political conqueror, expanding his empire and pushing a very specific social order. So how does the book build this case? Well, it zooms in on some of the most famous and difficult moments in the story. For instance, Ram killing his rival Vali, not face-to-face, but by hiding behind a tree. It really scrutinizes his treatment of Sita, first forcing her into a trial by fire, and then later banishing her while she's pregnant, all based on gossip. The book basically argues, are these the actions of a god or of a human ruler obsessed with power and public image? And this quote right here, this is the heart of it. The book reframes Ram's entire journey south. It's no longer a heroic quest to save his wife. Instead, it's a strategic military campaign to impose the culture and rule of the northern Aryan kingdoms onto the independent south. Okay, so if Ram is recast as a political conqueror, what does that do to his arch-nemesis, the supposed 10-headed demon king, Ravan? This is where things get really interesting. Yeah, the book essentially tells us to forget that image of the 10-headed monster we've all seen. It wants us to consider a far more complex and, from its point of view, a much more sympathetic figure. In this version, Ravan isn't a demon at all. He's a brilliant scholar, a powerful king of a thriving southern, or Dravidian kingdom. And his conflict with Ram? It kicks off because he's defending his family's honor after his sister is violently attacked. So his abduction of Sita isn't just pure evil. It's reframed as political retaliation. The war that follows becomes a desperate defense of his people against a foreign invader. So, we have a re-examined hero and a re-examined villain. How does the book tie it all together? Well, this brings us to its single most explosive, overarching argument. This is it. The whole book really hinges on this one powerful theory, that the Ramayana is not mythology, but a political allegory. It argues that it's the coded story of a real historical conflict, the expansion of a northern Sanskrit-speaking culture, which the book calls Aryan, and its violent clash with the native Dravidian civilizations of the south. And this table just lays it out so perfectly. Ram and his army, they become the face of northern expansionism. Ravan and his people, who the epic calls Rakshasas, or demons, are recast as Dravidian kungs defending their homeland. And that epic war? Well, according to the book, it's the story of the violent conquest of the south by the north. So you see what happens, right? Once you apply this political filter, the very idea of good and evil in the story gets completely turned on its head. Who you see as the hero and who you see as the villain depends entirely on which side of this historical conflict you're standing on. Ultimately, Sachi Ramayan isn't just some academic literary analysis. It's a powerful piece of social critique. It was written to challenge what its author believed was a sacred story being used to justify the dominance of one culture over another, and to question the very foundations of traditional power. And that really leaves us with one final crucial question to think about. What happens to any story when we just shift our perspective? How does its meaning, its power, and its influence on us change when we read it not as divine scripture, but as a contested, messy, and very human version of history? That's the challenge right at the heart of the True Ramayana.